Reliability Project online presentation. We are recording this presentation for folks who weren't able to make it tonight so they could come by at their convenience to watch the recording. We should have that up in just a few days. So again, and thank you for coming. I've got a whole team here with me that I'll send you, I'll do some introductions to. With me, you'll see I've got a whole team of panelists. We're here to take your questions, to answer any concerns that you may have. Please feel free to use the Q&A tool. I'll get over that in just a moment. So doing some introductions, Lori, if you could go over to the next slide. My name is Sarah Lake. I am an engagement strategist here at OPPD. With me, I've got two co-presenters here. We've got Joab Ortiz. He is a consultant that we have for our routing, siting, and public involvement portion of this project. And I also have Ty Cooper. He is our senior engineer. I kind of skipped through the agenda, so I'm sorry about that. We will be talking about this project. Ty will be helping explain what this project is, why we're having it, a little bit of the purpose and need about it, and all the benefits that it's going to bring to the Bellevue community. The Bellevue Reliability Project is split into two different portions. One is the Southeast Bellevue project, and the other one is Old Town. So he'll get into some details about that. After we hear from Ty, we'll be switching it over to Joab, and he's going to tell you a little bit about our routing, siting, and public involvement process. OPPD is proud to be public power, and with that, we care deeply about what the public thinks, and we really want to listen to your concerns, especially when we're routing a big project and we're building a big project like this Bellevue Reliability Project in your neighborhood. So he'll explain a little bit about what that process is like and how we want to get your input from the community. Then we'll talk a little bit more about the project schedule and what you could expect over the next several years with this project. And there's lots of different ways we want you to stay informed and how we hope to get your feedback throughout the process. Again, this is a really big project we'll kind of get into talking to you about, and there's several different parts of the project where we're going to need your feedback throughout the way. So we'll explain more as we go through this presentation. Thanks, Lori, for jumping around for me. As with OPPD, we are a safety first organization, and safety is always something that we lead all of our presentations with. And so with that, I did want to take a moment just to recognize safety. I know that many of you are sitting at home, maybe you're at the office, but please take a moment to identify any trip hazards, any exits, AEDs should you need that. If you're feeling ill and you do, please, health is #1 priority. If you needed to jump off this call, go ahead and do that, and you can see the recording later on. We'll have it on our website, which I'll explain in a little bit, OPPD Community Connect, which you guys all went to register for this presentation. So please take your health and safety as your first priority. Psychological safety is also really important here at OPPD, and what we hope to do is present an opportunity for respect, healthy conflict, multiple perspectives, trust, and we do really believe in a culture of curiosity. So with that, we will welcome questions, comments, concerns during this presentation. And at the next slide, I will explain a little bit about how we will ask for your feedback during this presentation. So with that, this is kind of my opening statement, just to kind of, this is our little housekeeping slide. So again, please, OPPD staff, you'll notice all of my colleagues here are on mute and they're not on camera, and we just do that just to not have any distractions. Also ask OPPD staff, those panelists, to mute any electronic devices. And as I mentioned before, yes, this meeting is being recorded. And our public attendees, those are currently in listen only mode. What we're hoping to do is make sure that during the presentation, if there are clarifying questions you really want us to kind of go back on, clarify something that we're talking about, we welcome that during the presentation. We just ask that you ask those questions through the Q&A tool. And so you'll see that there on the lower right-hand corner of your screen, Q&A. You just click on that, then you'll be able to ask questions to us here, and we'll be able to answer them throughout the presentation. We wanted to be able to offer you that throughout the presentation. However, since we are recording the presentation, we want to try to get through the presentation as, I don't want to say we're rushing it to get through it as quickly as possible, but we want to be succinct as we're going through the presentation. So at the very end of the presentation, we will open it up for people to verbalize questions. We just want to make sure we get to the bulk of the presentation first, so we could have that recorded for our guests who aren't able to come here today. And we will welcome those questions. And how we ask you to do that is use that hand raise tool that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. That's how we will know that you have a question. And then my partner, Kim, will be able to unmute you and you'll be able to verbalize the question. So again, we want to do that at the end of the presentation. So I hope that helps. Again, if you have clarifying questions about anything that I've said here at the beginning, please feel free to type it into that Q&A tool. Otherwise, like I said, at the end of the presentation, we will allow for questions that you might have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ty Cooper, and he's going to tell you a little bit about the project.
Thank you. Like Sarah said, I'm Ty Cooper, the transmission line engineer for the Bellevue Reliability Project. The Bellevue Reliability Project is upgrading OPPD transmission, substation, and distribution systems in Bellevue to be more resilient and reliable for the community and paving the way for growth. The high voltage transmission lines connect power plants and substations together, while the substations lower the voltage from those transmission lines to the distribution level. From there, distribution lines leave the substation to provide electricity to homes and businesses in the area. The map on the right shows the transmission project study areas for both Southeast Bellevue and Old Town. I'll cover those in a little more detail in the next couple of slides. This project is investing in infrastructure to support growth, mainly in Southeast Bellevue, including the new Good Life District. The new infrastructure will not only enable the growth, but be more resilient and reliable. That resiliency and reliability will also address vulnerabilities that we saw in 2011 and 2019 floods that were so impactful to this community. Areas impacted by the floods are a focus, with some facilities being removed from the floodplain to create a more reliable system. OPPD will also be replacing and upgrading aging infrastructure in the area. Bellevue is one of the oldest communities in Nebraska, and there's a lot of history here. Some of the OPPD infrastructure in Bellevue dates back to the 1940s. Upgrading and modernizing this infrastructure will support the critical needs of Offutt Air Force Base and the whole Bellevue community, residences and businesses. We're in the very early stages of this project, so we don't have a lot of details yet on what it'll look like or where exactly lines and facilities are going, but we will keep the public informed throughout the process. We really appreciate resident feedback throughout this process, and Joab will cover ways to give that feedback later in the presentation. Now we'll zoom into the Southeast Bellevue portion of the project. Upgrades in Southeast Bellevue will enable growth and support critical community infrastructure. This area is being prioritized first to prepare for new business and development, while also supporting the current power needs for established residents and businesses. Some of the first work in the area will be a substation expansion on Platteview Road that includes new equipment and distribution lines. We'll also be building a new substation near the Highway 34 and Highway 75 interchange and upgrading another existing substation. The new substation and associated facilities will support expansion in the area, such as the Good Life District, the Papia Wastewater Treatment Plant, and other business development. A new transmission line will also be built to connect the new substation to the existing subs in the area, and aging transmission infrastructure will be removed. Lori, can you go to the Old Town slide, please? Old Town Bellevue was heavily impacted by the 2011 and 2019 floods, and OPPD is committed to increasing the reliability in this area. The substation shown toward the east end of the study area is within the floodplain and is going to be removed as part of this project. It's too vulnerable where it's at and has had issues in the past. Other existing substations shown on the map will be upgraded, and aging transmission lines, like those ones I mentioned from the 1940s, that connect to these substations will be replaced with new lines that will be a higher capacity and more resilient to severe weather. All of this work is part of OPPD's commitment to a dependable grid in the Bellevue community. This work does include transmission lines that feed Offutt Air Force Base, and we will coordinate directly with them for that work. Now I'll pass it to Joab to talk about routing, siting, and public involvement.
Thanks, Ty. Good evening, everyone. So as we talk about the routing and siting process for both of these projects, I wanted to first start by explaining the process that we typically go through with any transmission line routing. So we've talked about both Southeast and Old Town as two transmission lines that are going to be needed for this project. And so what we're looking at right now is the first step in the process, and that's the study area phase. And at this phase, what we're here to do today is introduce the project, introduce information about why we're doing this and how it impacts community, and gathering feedback from local leaders and the community about the project area. So we're really looking for feedback from you all to help us to understand the area that we're going to be working in. That's the first phase, the study area phase. Once we gather that information along with some information about environmental and engineering, we start developing routes, transmission line routes of where we could connect point to point, what that's going to look like. It'll have lines and some segments in between. That's the route network. Depending on the size of the study area, you could have a bunch of different routes, or you could have just a few routes. From that, once we've developed that information, then we will come back to you and we will have a second round of meetings. We will meet with both local leaders and the community to talk about the routes that we've developed and look for information specifically about where those routes are, what kind of impacts they could have, and get your feedback. Now, if there are a multitude of routes and we have a lot of options that we're looking at, we may need to come back with another round, what we call the reduced route network. From there, we would take the routes that we've developed, we would eliminate some in our study and evaluation and from the feedback we get from you, and then we would reduce that to a few routes left, and then we would have the conversation again. What do we need to know? Make sure that we have all the information that we need, and then from your input, from the community input, from local leadership, from environmental and in engineering, we take all that and we determine what that final route is going to be, and then we make that announcement. After that, it goes into another phase, which would be right away in engineering and so forth. But that is the typical routing process that we look at, and that's what we're going to be doing here today. Next slide, please. So as we look at the route options that we have for these two transmission lines, we look at three categories of criteria. Ty and the engineers will look at structures and highways. They look at all the different obstacles for engineering and how they would engineer. How are they going to be able to develop this and draw it on paper? How is it going to work when we get to construction? We have environmental folks that will look at, are there any archaeological sites, wooded area, parks, conservation areas, floodplains, which we know there's a lot of floodplains in this area. We look at all that information as well. And the third category, which is the most important category in a lot of ways, and that's why you're here, is that social category. And we look at what are the community needs? Are there impacts to businesses? Are there impacts to homes, to churches, to, how will this project impact community? Because we want to take your input and your concerns into consideration as we develop the route options that we are going to look at. Now, those are three different categories, and sometimes we have to look at them and weigh them and say, okay, what makes the most sense here? And so that's what we look at when we look at how do we develop the lines on paper that ultimately become the transmission line route. Next slide, please. So as I said, there are steps in this process where we want to make sure that we're engaging with you all, engaging with community. So we are taking a very proactive approach of coming out here to share the project today with just boundaries of a study area to say, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to gather feedback, we're going to develop those routes, and then we're going to come back to you and have more conversations. We want this to be a collaborative process in terms of communicating with you all and sharing information as we try to make the most informed decision we can on where these projects are going to ultimately end up. Next slide, please. So as we talk about specifically about the Bellevue Reliability Project, and as we said before, there are two different projects here. There's the Southeast Project and the Old Town Project. Well, today we are in this study area phase. We've met with local leaders. We're here having this online presentation today. And next week we'll be having these community engagement sessions, which Sarah will talk a little bit more about. These are the input opportunities for us as we look at the study area. Now, because of scheduling and the size of these projects, we're going to break these into two different schedules. First, we're going to look at developing our route network for the Southeast segment. If it requires additional input, we may need to add an additional meeting, but at this point, we don't believe that's going to happen, and that we will actually be able to make a decision on the routes after we get that input sometime this summer. We're hoping for June that we'll be able to do that. But that's after we've had the local leader meetings, gotten input from the community, from those lines that we've put on paper. At the same time, we will also be working on a route network for Old Town. And in that project, we hope to have the local leader meetings and the open house with lines on paper sometime about June, July timeframe. From there, we will gather feedback, we will look at routes, and we believe we might have to have a second round of meetings on that one just to make sure that we've evaluated all of our options. We'll get more input from local leadership, more input from you all, the community, and then make that final decision on the route sometime before the end of the year, hopefully in November. With that, and the way these two projects are being staggered, we hope to have the Southeast project complete and running operational by the end of the year in 2028, and the Old Town project sometime in the spring of 2029. So we're really looking to work through this scheduled process where we engage at multiple points along the way. Once this is completed, the routing and siting process completed, the next step would be to, for each of these projects, is to have our land acquisition folks or our right-of-way, our easement folks come out and talk to the community about how about the easements, permits. We do engineering. All of that will begin once routes have been determined. So when we finish the Southeast project sometime this summer, in terms of routing and siting, they will then begin the right-of-way process and the permitting process and the engineering process. Old Town will not start until after the end of the year with right-of-way and engineering and permitting. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah, and she's going to tell you about ways to stay informed.
Thank you, Joab, and thank you, Ty. As Joab mentioned, following this webinar, next week, we are going to be holding 2 community engagement sessions. And I'm sorry, it is so dark in this room. Oops. That doesn't really help, maybe a little bit. Sorry about that. I have windows over here that I usually get light from the daylight coming in, but it is dark at 6 o'clock, so I'm sorry about that. Anyway, we've got these community engagement sessions, 2 of them happening next week. These are going to be in-person open houses that we're inviting the public to come by anytime. There's not going to be a scheduled presentation like this, but instead people can come in at their own time, learn more about the project, talk to people from the project team. And this is a great opportunity for you to come talk to us, tell us a little bit about the community, tell us what what's important to you about the community. What should we consider here in Bellevue while we're figuring out what those routes are going to look like? This would be a perfect time to kind of begin that conversation and talk with us some more about it. Again, these are 2 in-person sessions. They're open house style, one in the Old Town area and one in that Southeast Bellevue area. Please feel free to join us during those community engagement sessions. We're going to be covering a lot of the same stuff that we covered today during this online presentation, but it's just some people prefer to see them online, some people prefer to go in person, so we wanted to offer both opportunities. Also, we have a website that's dedicated to this project. That's oppdcommunityconnect.com/Bellevue. And I know all of you who are here today did visit that website because that is how you registered for this site. So please know that we update that website on a regular basis. As you saw, Joab went through all these different steps of the public involvement, routing and siting process, and then all the way actually through construction, you know, the next several years of this project. That is the website where we will keep you the most updated as where we are at with the project. So if you're very interested in this project, that is a good website to bookmark because we'll be referencing it quite a bit. We also have a project hotline. That phone number is 402-200-4128. Through that hotline, if you have questions, if you have concerns, feel free to call us at any time and we'll call you back and we'll address those concerns. Through any of these channels, whether it's our community engagement sessions, our website, and our project hotline, this is where we will welcome any sort of feedback that you have. We're going to be asking if you have questions tonight. But tonight, we're not really asking for questions about your individual properties because we feel like that handles more on like a one-on-one conversation. So if you do have questions about your individual properties, rather than raising your hand and asking them during this webinar, I would ask if you could please maybe call our project hotline, or you could even put a message in the Q&A that you have a question about your property. We do have your email address and we will be able to respond to you via email. We just don't want to get into individual property conversations tonight on this webinar. I also wanted to call out something that's kind of that could be a great tool on our OPPD Community Connect page. We have an interactive map on that page. If you open up that page and on your computer, you'll see a little button that I put there along the right-hand side, and it says interactive map. When you click on that button, it'll bring up an interactive map, and that's where you could actually go so far as to put your address into the map, and it'll pull up your address, and you can put a little pin on your home or on your business or your intersection that you're concerned about, or your school or community center, or whatever it is that you want to tell us about. You can feel free to give us that specific location information on that interactive map. And these are all the different bits of feedback that Joab is saying that we want to hear and learn about over this next year as we're trying to figure out what is going to be the best route for this project for your community. Again, OPPD representatives are here to help answer all your questions throughout this whole process. And we really, really want to have you join us throughout the whole way because your feedback is very important to us. If you can go to the next slide, Lori. This is kind of really concludes our presentation. We now welcome your questions if you have any. And again, please note, like I said earlier, the questions about your individual properties are best handled outside of this presentation. But if you do have any questions that you'd like us to address, clarifying questions about the project, we'd love to have you have that opportunity to ask us that now. You can do that through the Q&A tool. Just feel free to click that Q&A button and ask it that way. Or we have a hand raise icon available too. And so if you have a question you'd like to verbalize, please click that hand raise button, and then Kim can take you off mute and you could vocalize your question. We can answer it that way. I do see that we have a call-in user as well on the call today. And so for you on the call, if you do have a question for us, we're asking you to dial *3 on your phone, and that will allow you to raise your hand if you're not looking at a screen. So I'm going to Be quiet for just a moment, just see if anyone has any questions. Kim, are there any questions in the Q&A tool?
There are none now.
Okay. I don't see any hand raises either. If you're looking for the Q&A tool, there's like a little box with a question mark on it in the bottom of your computer. Yeah, if you can see it there. We don't have the chat on, so it's going to look a little bit different from what it looks like on this screen. Must have made a update since we made that graphic. Well, it does not look like we have any questions, so I hope our presentation helped fill you in with what this project's going to be about and why we're having it and how you could get involved moving forward. You should receive a survey after this presentation. That's going to give you another opportunity to provide us feedback, how this presentation went for you today, and if you do have any questions or concerns about the project itself. That's just yet another way we're trying to ask you for your feedback. But again, I want to thank you all so much for attending. I'm just kind of talking just a little bit in case anyone else has any additional questions. Again, please feel free to join us next week for our community engagement sessions. I'll be there with a whole lot of the other people that we have here on this online presentation. We'll be in person. We can kind of walk you through this, help answer any questions that you have. It'll be a great opportunity for us to hear from you about your individual properties, buildings, roads, sidewalks, parks, things like that that you care about, that you want us to know about. So we'll look forward to seeing you maybe next week. If not, like I said, there was a project hotline, website, lots of ways to get a hold of us throughout this whole process. So again, thank you so much for joining, and I guess we will end it here and we'll see you later. Have a good evening.